We all know the trouble Adam and Eve got into with this piece of fruit.
Bruh.
I'm sure it was worth every bite, so when I get these home, I'm gonna create a sinfully simple meal. Let me share a secret recipe. Discover an ingredient that fires your imagination. Choose other flavors to match. Find the best way to cook them.
Simple is best.
My secret recipe? Cooking without a recipe.
You can do it too.
These apples Gabe and I picked are not just a snack. They're an opportunity to explore some new flavor combinations.
No.
I've got two different meats to choose from for dinner, pork and beef. But beef's not going to make the cut because apple's on the menu tonight, and beef's too strongly flavored to go with apples. It'll just overwhelm them. Pork, on the other hand, is perfect. It's got a nice, mild, neutral flavor. In fact, I think of it as a vehicle. In other words, it's meant to carry other flavors. Bye-bye, beef. Apples go perfectly with pork. They complement and contrast the meat. They complement with a sweet, mild flavor, and they contrast with their sharp sourness. That's probably why I'm not the first cook to put apples with pork. They just taste great together. Now, today I'm using a pork shoulder roast. This is a pot roast. That means it needs a moist heat cooking method to break down all the connective tissue within that meat. And the best way to do that is a long, slow simmer, braising really, pot roast. Now, the first step, of course, is to build all the flavor I possibly can into that meat. Because I'm going to be simmering it for an hour or more at a very low temperature with lots of moisture around, the meat won't have the opportunity to develop the rich, deep brown flavors that I like so much. So, the first step is to put those flavors in right now. Now I'm going to cut this into half, open up some more surface area. And by opening up more surface area, of course, that's more room for brown flavor. Now, I know that looks like an awful lot of meat for one family, but every time I braise, I always want to have leftovers. Now, that golden brown color means flavor and lots of it, but there's still room in that pot for more flavor. One of the guidelines I follow when I introduce a particular ingredient to a dish or to a meal, I always feel comfortable adding another form of the same ingredient. In this case, bacon, because pork goes with pork. It's very simple. Raw onions are sharp and pungent, but as soon as you start heating them, cooking them, they start to mellow out quite a bit and they get very sweet. They'll be a perfect accompaniment for apples and pork. Now this is going to take a few minutes to brown, but I'm hungry for apples and pork right now. I've got time to make a snack. I think I'll whip up an apple salad. This is a Gala apple. It's the perfect apple for making salad because it's nice and crisp. It's got great texture to it. And of course, it's got a sour and apple flavor built in too. And here we go with another kind of pork, ham. Some green mustard. Salt and pepper. Splash of olive oil. we go. And I think some walnuts too. And while I'm at it, some red onion. This is the perfect place for red onion. I've got the sweet, crisp apples, the sharpness of the mustard, the pungency of the onions, a little bit of bitterness in the walnuts, rich, smoky ham, salt and pepper to round everything out, olive oil for body. That's how you make a salad. Looks like I'm going to have leftover salad, too. Ooh, very nice salad. Lots of balance in there. It's my first pork and apple of the day. And this one's doing good, too, although that's got a bit of time. And I still have this huge pile of apples. I'm going to have to think about what to do with those. Have you ever wondered how chefs come up with the flavor combinations that define their cooking style?
No.
Well, it's as simple as understanding how certain flavors complement each other, like today's apple and pork pot roast, which I began by browning the pork shoulder, caramelizing it to build flavor. Then I started the flavor base by browning bacon and onions. Now that those onions are brown, it's time to put it back in the pot. It's almost time to start simmering. Now, since I know these apples are going to disintegrate as they simmer with the pork, I'm not too worried about the shape I cut them in right now. Just get them in the pot, no big deal. I think I'll throw a carrot in there as well. Add some earthiness to the flavor base. Carrots are nice and sweet, but they also have a beautiful earthy tone to them. Really add some base to this flavor here. Okay, time for some liquid. Some good white wine. I'm using a Chardonnay today, but whatever white wine you have at home would work great in this dish. I'm going to pour about half a bottle in, and some broth, some chicken broth. Now notice the level of liquid. It's very important to just barely cover whatever it is that you're trying to tenderize. You don't have to completely submerge it. You just have to almost cover it, just like that. Now, as I look at those apples, there's one more way to add some apple flavor to this. I've got some homemade applesauce. This is something I make for Gabe all the time. He loves applesauce, and it's so simple to make. Begin with 6 or 8 tasty apples. Core them, then chop roughly and toss into a pot. Add a cup or so of brown sugar and the juice from half a lemon. Season with cinnamon and nutmeg and cook until the apples are soft. Puree until smooth. Now at this point I have all the liquid I need in that pot to simmer and tenderize that pork, but I don't have all the flavor in there yet that I'm looking for. I think some grainy mustard will work. I prefer grainy mustard because it has less of a sharp acidic bite than Dijon-style mustards. That should do it right there. Although, you know what? I need a bay leaf in there. Or maybe even 2 or even 3 bay leaves. That'll add a nice savory edge to that flavor. That'll keep all the moisture inside right where it belongs. This is going to be great. It'll probably take about an hour and a half or so to finish off. That's more than enough time to get some vegetables ready. When you're experimenting with flavor combinations, there's lots of places to find inspiration. For instance, flavor balance, sweet and sour apple with mild pork, or playing around within a family of ingredients, pork with bacon, or seasonality, finding ingredients that grow and mature and come to market together, like acorn squash and apples, fall vegetables, fall fruits. They always taste good together. My mom used to bake these off for us when we were kids all the time. Of course, she didn't need any fancy theories about what flavors went with other flavors. She just trusted her kitchen instinct, and that's probably the best guideline of all. If it tastes good to you, it works. I've preheated the oven to 350 degrees because I want to bake these slowly. These are something that you don't do fast. If you do, they'll burn quickly. Now, there is a lot of opportunity to add flavor here, too. In fact,
another
Gabe's
one.
going to kill me. I'm really eating into his applesauce stash, but he'll understand. Actually, one of these is for him. And this is a great way to aromatize acorn squash. I'm just going to put a giant scoop of applesauce right in the middle of each one of these. I'm going to add a tiny bit of butter as well. Butter basically adds flavor to anything you add it to. And some salt and pepper. Should do it. Now, as these bake, they're going to release some juices, and the juices will collect on the bottom of the pan, and they can burn, and the burning smell can permeate the squash. So a good way to head that off is simply to add some water to the bottom. Not very much, about a half an inch or so. And then they're ready for the oven. 350 degrees. They'll probably take about an hour, maybe a little bit more, so I'll keep a close eye on them. So, I've got the time and the apples to make dessert. Gabe and I picked a basket full of crisp apples today, so naturally they're starring in tonight's dinner, which is easy with apples. They're so versatile. And of course, as usual, I'm playing around with flavor combinations in my kitchen. I decided to make a pork pot roast, so I began by browning the meat. Then I added a flavor base of browned bacon and onions. I tossed in some apples and carrots and covered the works with white wine and chicken broth. And then for a flavor boost, I added grain mustard and applesauce. Lots of apple flavors going around here today. And just look at that. You can just see the flavor in there. That meat is tenderizing quickly. It's not 100% done, but it's getting awful close. I've got time to make an apple dessert for sure. I think I'll do one of my mom's specialties, a simple baked apple. I'm going to use Gala apples again. I love the crispness of these apples. They're great for desserts too. I'm just cutting off the tops. Now I'll scoop out the inside with an ice cream scoop. This will work great. Now, of course, the more I take out of the middle, the more room there is to add flavor. Now, not all apples are created equal. Some are better for baking than others. There are over 5,000 different types of apples out there, yet we tend to stick to the tried and true, the good old Granny Smith. And why not? It's a good apple. It's got a nice balance of sweet and sour and a beautiful crisp texture. But with all this choice, why not try something new? For me, there are three basic types of apples. There are apples that are great for eating right out of your hand, apples that have a beautiful crisp texture, that are sweet and sour, apples like the Braeburn, one of my favorites. Then there are the puree apples. Apples like the Macintosh, lots of sweet and sour flavor, but a soft texture that breaks down into a puree when you cook them. Perfect for making applesauce. And the baking apples. Apples that hold their shape when you cook them. Apples like the Golden Delicious or even the Gala. Hey, don't take your apples for granted like Adam and Eve did. With all this choice, find one that works for you. My mom's famous baked apples featured brown sugar, and lots of it. They also featured cinnamon. But hey, isn't cinnamon a little boring? Haven't we done that enough?
No.
I'm on board with the brown sugar. There's a lot of flavor in there. But to me, cinnamon apples has run its course. It's time to try some other flavors. I've got a shelf full of strong, dominant spice flavors, just like cinnamon, and they all would taste great with apples. Cardamom. Cardamom, that'll go great with apples. Now, by stuffing these apples with brown sugar and butter, I'm going to encourage a caramel to develop inside them while they bake. Now, that's how you build flavor.
No.
Now, of course, if you don't have cardamom at home right now, it's perfectly fine to use cinnamon. It tastes great. There's nothing wrong with it. All I'm saying is that an apple's a great opportunity to experiment.
No.
And I'll bake these at 350, but before I do, I'm going to put their hats back on. That's why I saved the tops to these apples. Doesn't matter if they don't fit. What matters is that there's a hat. It's going to keep all those flavors inside the apple. Hey, that squash is looking good. Those apples look good in there with that squash. Now I'm going to need something to soak all this tasty broth up here. So I'm thinking about making spätzle. Every culture in the world has some kind of simple noodle. Well, the Germans call theirs spätzle, German egg dumplings. Best of all, it's one of the easiest of all the noodles to make. It starts with 4 eggs, a cup and a half of milk, and 3 cups of flour. I like using whole wheat flour in mine, mainly because whole wheat flour tastes better and it's better for you. It's got all its nutrients still intact. I'm also going to need about a teaspoon or so of baking powder, some salt and pepper, and I like putting nutmeg in my spätzle. I've experimented with various spices. You don't have to add any spices to it, but I've experimented with lots, and I've always found that nutmeg always tastes great in spätzle. Now, that water's boiling away, but it needs one thing. Like any good noodle water, it needs a lot of salt. Not just a little bit of salt, a lot of salt. That water should taste like a day at the ocean. Then you know it's ready to cook. Okay, now I promised this was easy. All you need is a simple box grater and a rubber spatula. Here's how you do it. That's the working end of the box grater right there. Get some of the batter. Put it inside, hold it over the boiling water, and work it through those holes, just like that. Couldn't be simpler. As soon as they float back to the surface, they're done. How do you like them apples? Now I took the spätzle after I cooked it all off and chilled it down and browned it off in some butter, because it's just like making toast really. All those whole wheat flavors in there, they really come alive with a little bit of toasting like that. Really nice. Aha, the moment I've been waiting for. Just look at that. You know, I've got some options at this point. I could haul this big chunk out just like that and start slicing it up. But you know what? It's so tender, I might as well just break it up into chunks and treat this as a stew. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. That's how you know it's tender. Just look at that. It just falls apart and I'm barely even touching it. This is cool because I think for the rest of his life, Gabe is going to associate apples and picking apples with good food like this. And I even chopped some parsley up to garnish today. Oh, nice bright apple flavor. Totally survived the braising journey.
You know.
You don't have to be a pro to come up with your own flavor combinations. It's really as simple as looking for something like balance, sweet apples, sour mustard, or looking for ingredients within the same family, like pork and bacon, or even seasonal ingredients like squash and apples. But most importantly, trust your instincts, because if you find two ingredients that taste good together, then you've got a winner, like pork and apples. Can you say Spätzle?
Oh, look, Gabe.
What are these, Gabe? What's that right there?
It's apples, dear.
Yeah.
Careful. Baked apple, just like Grandma used to make them. Want to try some squash, Gabe? Little special squashes with applesauce. Is it good?
Really good. It's almost like a dessert.
Here's to climbing trees and picking apples.
Into a great meal.
And cooking with them.